Okay, we are here on the 4th of December for our monthly pro-organic speakers meeting. You'll see on the screen right now our sponsors for this year, the Bluff Restaurant and the Belize Ag Report, which we definitely appreciate them and what they've done for us. And our meeting today is about overcoming challenges. And our speaker will be Clifford Martinez, Jr. He's the Director of Extension Services in the Department of Agriculture here in Belize. And he will be talking to us about overcoming challenges, which we know all of us have had to do in the last almost 2 years now. So just a couple of ground rules for the meeting. If everybody can please stay muted because the presentation is recorded. And during Clifford's talk, as you think of questions that you would want to ask him, if you'll submit your questions to the pro-organic host instead of to everyone. And then at the end of his presentation, I will read the questions off to him and then he'll take the time to answer those. So you can be thinking of them and send them to me as the presentation is, being done. Just a quick introduction to who Pro-Organic is. You can go to our Facebook page for details about Pro-Organic and information. And then our Facebook group is for a discussion. And then Pro-Organic, our organization, if you'd like information on membership, which we usually do on a yearly basis, you can go to our website, pro-organicbelize.org. The website has all kinds of information about us and other things. It has our speaker meetings recorded for all of this year. See if you've missed ones and you want to go back and view them again, just go to the website under speakers and they're there. In our consumer group, there's also details on the website about pesticide-free produce and how you can get on the weekly list for ordering this produce, especially during these times of wanting to stay healthy. We believe that pesticide-free produce is an excellent way of doing that. So like I said, submit your questions for Clifford via the Zoom chat to the Pro-Organic host. I'll turn the screen over to Clifford. He will do an introduction for himself and then go on with his presentation. Okay, Clifford, it's all yours. Except you'll need to unmute. There we go.
All right. Good afternoon, Pro-Organic comrades. You're able to hear?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation to present today. It's an honor to myself and to the Ministry of Agriculture, as indeed I am representing the ministry in this presentation. As you are aware already, my post is the Director of Extension, and so our responsibility is to ensure that there is proper technical technology sharing and information sharing, capacity building and training, and the transfer of new information and sharing of existing information with our stakeholders of the agriculture sector, that is producers, agro-processors, growers, everybody involved in agriculture production and the sector itself. I thought that it would be best if I assemble the presentation and share the information in a sustainable development context for several reasons. The work of organic producers is one where it has highlighted the need to consider not only economic gains, but also to consider social and environmental dimensions. It's in organic production, it's in ecological production, it's in eco-friendly production, it's in good agricultural practices that we consider the other dimensions in our goal or efforts for increased income and a balanced society. And so I place it in a sustainable development context. And so I thought that overcoming challenges, we could approach it with that holistic approach. As you all are aware, sustainable development, not the first mention of it, but the first promotion and sharing of the idea of sustainable development came through the Brundtland Report at the UN. And it is built on the idea that human societies must live and meet their needs without compromising future generations. And there are 3 ways that that can be done. I've mentioned in the introduction that has to be done through a complete comprehension and appreciation of the benefits and importance of the environmental, the social, and the economic pillars. Sustainable development looks at 5 P's: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Those 5 P's, you approach and you address these without compromising the value of the other or the benefits of the other. They're very interdependent. And so when you look at economic dimension, you cannot exclude social and you cannot exclude environmental, right? And so most of you will know that Sustainable Development Goals is global, it's regional, and now Belize has adopted it and signed on to it. What is important to remember of the Sustainable Development Goal is that it's a goal, it's intention, it's opportunities for us to work as a collective, as a global village, and to also work as institutions, different institutions towards a particular target. So if there are concerns that the Sustainable Development Goals haven't been as achievable as they should be, there is still the optimism shared where it has provided us with guiding projections, guiding outputs, guidelines and targets to meet, and it hadn't been done before. Or if it had been reserved solely, for example, to address hunger in isolation of other components, or to address peace, and therefore in isolation of the other components. And so for agriculture, specific to agriculture, we know that we fall within Goal 2, for example, which aspires for no hunger by 2030. Gender equality, something that the agriculture sector is not exemplary in. Clean water and sanitation, which is Goal 6. Innovation and infrastructure, Goal 9. Responsible consumption, Goal 12. Climate action, Goal 13. And one of my favorite, Goal 17, which is partnership of institutions, partnership of different mindsets and different religious groups, and different belief system. And so there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, which are the indicators. Why I brought to your attention the Sustainable Development Goal is because it brings the backdrop and it gives a reminder of where we probably went wrong in agriculture development. And here is highlighted on the screen. Agriculture development has always been the focus for economic gains, principal economic gains, profit-driven, pure capitalism, and sometimes extreme practices and applications and technologies that risk and destroy, for example, the environment, that risk and destroys human health, and causes significant ills in some societies. There are many instances where unsustainable agriculture practices and development has allowed us now to see water resources or water sources disappear, has allowed us to see contamination of different areas, has allowed us to see extinction of species, and it has therefore compromised the eco services provided by forested areas or biodiversity hotspots. When you look at economic development overall, people are concerned, or societies are mainly concerned for profits, some sort of governance system, poor risk management, and improper compliance occurrences. You all know that the economic indicator that we use is the GDP, the gross and domestic product, and it's strictly monetary. It looks at private consumption, it looks at gross private investment, government spending, and then exports and imports, the balance between exports and import. We have our own way of monitoring that in this country, and most information can be received from the Statistical Institute of Belize, and I've placed there the site where we can access those information. Belize's GDP has seen 14% decrease, specifically in 2020, but the graph will show you that there's been incremental increase since 2000, at least since, this is what I've captured for the past 10 years. I looked at a 10-year, and I saw, for example, where 2008 would have been the more standout year. However, the increase has been consistently incremental, and it's showing that Belize is in some sort of way generating and advancing to a better developed society or country. That does not mean that there aren't challenges and inconsistencies in the way that we have advanced our society. But I place this on the screen because it's important to note that agriculture plays an important role in our GDP, and later on I'll present the figures to you. So I spoke about the development goals, the sustainable development goals, 17 of them, and we also have our national strategies. However, our national strategies seems to be those strategies that are still based on the typical or the conventional economic type policies. We have the Horizon 2030, the Growth and Sustainable Development Strategy. This is a 15-year strategy. Horizon 2030 is a 30-year strategy for the country. We have our national trade policy. There's the National Tourism Master Plan. There's some incentive programs. There's the Plan Belize medium-term strategy. And what is applicable to us is the agriculture and food policy. And that is one that we would see mentions or targets within Horizon 2030, for example, within the Growth Sustainable Development Strategy, and within the Sustainable Development Goals. We have captured there the intentions of Belize and our people to move towards food sovereignty, for example, and to move towards addressing the needs of society, which is, again, in line with the Sustainable Development Goal, is to reduce hunger, to increase household income, to improve the balance between agricultural development and environmental protection, to look at biofinancing and those sort of mechanisms that will see us receive income from our environment and meanwhile protecting the environment. Horizon 2030 produces several points. I highlighted the points that, in my mind, in my opinion, attains to us or are more akin to us in the agriculture sector. This is point 2, develop the domestic market as a springboard for exports, to build a vibrant agriculture sector, to target selected new sectors, and then to look at implementing a coherent and consistent macroeconomic policy. And I highlighted these not only because of the vibrant agriculture sector that we have, but because of the need to protect this vibrant sector and in line ensure that we are able to guarantee future resources for generations to come. And in light of the pressures on the little resources that we have, whether it's land, whether it's water, and human resource, importantly. These are here to remind us that there is the need to protect what our production is, to intensify our production without too much expansion, without expansionism, and then as well as to look at renewable practices that will guarantee our production and our revenues within the next 15 years or 30 years. And so Horizon 2030 speaks to those. The Sustainable Development Goals as well, and it applies as well. And we have extracted from this in order to build our food, our agriculture and food policy. Critical success factor from the Sustainable Development Goals shows that there is need for us to look at export markets to attract foreign investment, but at the same time to look at the adequate skills and capacity to support economic growth, development, and resilience, as long as it's within the confines of protecting the social dimension, which is improving poverty, addressing poverty, addressing unemployment, addressing pollution, addressing diseases and the increased number of people affected with cancer, diabetes, and related diseases. The trade policy, I'm only extracting the 2 points from the trade policies. Again, it's in line with what the food and agriculture policy is, which is to improve trade performance, diversify production. In the assessments that has been done of the agriculture sector, especially the labor force survey, it has shown that there's not been a diversity in jobs. There's been the same jobs. There are jobs that are poor, minimum wages. There hasn't been new skills development. And so those are sort of some of the things that we have to look at. And so those are some of the challenges that we currently present. And if you're not able to identify your challenges and concerns, then you wouldn't know how to address these challenges and concerns. Another point I extracted from this is to build and strengthen multilateral, regional, and bilateral trade relations. And for several reasons. One that stands out is because we have a small population and we're seeing where production has grown, productivity has increased, and our national or domestic market is still small. So we've grown exponentially. And so Belize is considered a net producer of food, of the basic food items. We are net producers of grains, poultry, beef, pork, milk, which are dairy, and some citrus products. So for one, Belize is one of the countries in the Caribbean and in Central America that can guarantee a basic food basket for its population for a particular time period. More or less you monitor within 4 and 6 months for immediately. And so in cases of national emergency, Belize can, in some sort of way, show some resilience. COVID-19, in the early parts of COVID-19 in March of 2020, that concern stood out. And so the Ministry of Agriculture and our stakeholders had to collectively monitor, look at the data and statistics, and then project food acquisition and production for a particular time period. And I'll speak about that if needs be later on. The National Agriculture and Food Policy looks at 5 pillars: the production, productivity, and competitiveness enhancement. Pillar 2 is market development, access and penetration. Pillar 3, improvement in food and nutrition security. Pillar 4, promotion of sustainable management systems and risk management. And Pillar 5, effective and efficient governance system. There is also where we believe that the policy instruments and measures, governance on a whole is interlinked with all these. And so Pillar 5, we have placed it on its own because it flows across all the other pillars, the other 4 pillars: effective and efficient governance systems and mechanisms. Again, I want to mention here that the National Agriculture and Food Policy has several expected impact or outputs. And I'm placing here those that stands out more on the macroeconomic description, and it is to, in a way, recognize the agriculture sector and the importance of our farmers and what we produce, not only at the household level, but its contribution, like I mentioned earlier, to GDP and its important role in ensuring that Belize develops. And you'll know that the agriculture sector is responsible for 75% of income of importation, and has a significant percentage, more than 85% in terms of export potential and value in this country. And so the expected impact from our agriculture and food policy looks at increased the agriculture and food sector average annual growth from 2.8% to 4%, to look at our contribution, the contribution of the agriculture sector from what is an average of 13%, sometimes it dips as low as 8%, but to increase that and improve that to a level of 20% GDP. To look at annual growth rate, I've mentioned some of that in some of the activities that we can do for that. To look at current average rate of growth in imports of food commodities. In some instances, we talk about import substitution, but when we're on the trade discussion and conversation, it is more for us to reduce importation by matching our production and subsidizing, and also replacing some of those imports with quality goods or quality services and consistency in the production of those quality goods. And so we're looking at some of those targets and others. I won't mention the others. And this slide will show us our import performance. But what I'm highlighting here is that importation within our in Belize overall, the standout products are those that pertain to the agriculture sector. Fuel and oil, items of food preparation, and value addition. And then one of the more valuable or high priority imported commodity, which is fertilizers. And the graph will show you the countries that we import from mainly, and at a 10-year period, it has shown you the dynamics in terms of our importation. And so it suggests here that China, for example, and Guatemala seems to be the country where we have a more level or less volatile importation activity. While the US seems that some year, for example, in 2012, it was low in importation, while in 2019, there was a high value, high number of goods or high value of importation for the US. And then you'll see in Trinidad and Tobago, it's minor, but it's also fluid. In terms of export, our export is similarly, we import a high value from the US, and we also export a substantial amount to the US. There's more fluidity. It's more consistent when you look at the United Kingdom, and then our neighbor to the north, Mexico, and then Jamaica are our export destinations. Everything, or most of everything in terms of our export basket, with exception to lobster, most of everything is produced by the agriculture sector. And so this shows or highlights the importance of our sector in development and in income, import, export, and then more importantly, in the trade balance. And we have a negative trade balance. We import a difference of maybe, we import $1.2 billion, and we only export around 500 or 700 in terms of $1 million. And so there's a trade deficit there of probably 500 to 600 million dollars. And so that's something that shows the potential, but also you can't address that potential unless you understand and appreciate the challenges affecting the agriculture sector. And some of you will know those challenges more than I do, but together or collectively, we can approach those. And this is one of my favorite slides. I thought I'd share this with you all. And it says this for us, no? The farmers and our producers are very important. That's basically what it's saying. Whether you are crying out or urging for food sovereignty, or whether it's for leisure and relaxation. And this highlights where for relaxation and leisure, it's even more important. In terms of our contribution to the GDP, I've mentioned before, agriculture averages around 12%. Well, agriculture, hunting, and forestry. So those are the primary sectors. And agriculture within that would be about 8%. So overall, it's about 12% for the primary sectors. Our other sector that contributes similarly would be transport and communication. And then the highest contributor would be tourism. And that is why tourism is so coveted in this country. I would like to highlight that since the 1950s, agriculture has served as the primary income earner in this country. It has averaged, like I mentioned, in and around 16% to GDP. For the past few years, the average has been about 23,700 jobs. So it employs a quarter of the employable population. And it looks at, so when I said quarter, it's about between 15 and 17% of the labor force. Again, you all know that the common agriculture commodities are banana, citrus, and sugarcane. However, we've seen some increase through grains, which is corn, red kidney beans, and rice. And then we're starting to see diversification in terms of the potential of soursop and coconut, cattle, and then there's now a possibility that we may be looking at the exportation of poultry. And the graph here, it's this image is an older image. It starts at 2015, but it's showing the contribution to GDP has been in and around the same value. This graph similarly shows the commodities I've highlighted and the growth in these commodities over the past period, over a particular period. In terms of what you're seeing on the screen now, an agriculture economic output trend, we're noticing for the past 10 years that there's been a little decline in terms of some of the contribution of agriculture to the agriculture sector. And that could be for several reasons. We believe that trade and trade agreements might be the cause. There is the belief that there is disease, pest and disease. There is damages and losses because of natural disaster. And so I'll mention some of those. But what I want to highlight here is, as I've mentioned, the value of 500 million and 600 million for a particular time period in this country, the agriculture sector contribution to the GDP. Similarly, if you look at particular commodities, we lost papaya for maybe 8 years ago. Shrimp was on the decline because of early mortality syndrome and some other disease affecting shrimp. There's some modification and investment happening there for a regrowth. Citrus has seen some damages because of the citrus greening disease, the Hulang Peng. We are seeing where producers, growers are adopting, are looking for resilient or tolerant varieties, and then replanting groves. Sugarcane and banana are king, so they continue. A little challenges with the sugarcane sector. There's been growth in poultry and growth in grains in terms of the value contribution of value. Like I mentioned before, the previous slide spoke about the 10-year period. We're looking here now at 2019 and 2020. These are COVID years, and so these stands out. The end of 2019 and then 2020 and now 2021, we have seen that agriculture still plays an important role, and it's one of the sectors that has maintained resiliency despite COVID-19, and more importantly, despite the the shocks. There's been contraction, but the agriculture sector continues as one of the performing sector and contributors. The Ministry of Agriculture has undergone an exercise in recognition of the importance of our farmers and producers. We've undergone an exercise to improve statistics and data collection. It's undergone this exercise as well to look at improving our outreach and our services to producers. And one way that was done is that we developed our information management system. This information management system allows us to register our farmers and to geolocate our farms and then to monitor production. And this has become even more important in the COVID-19 years because of the need and because of the threats posed by the issues affecting importation, shipping, transportation, hoarding by other countries. There's been a wake-up call given to our governments and our countries on the importance of producing your own food and protecting your producers. And when we did our exercise, it is voluntary. This is not mandatory. So farmers were receptive to it. And so we were able to register 12,000 plus farmers and geolocate 13,000 plus farms. These are individual units. I'm not placing here the total acreages again. And what we noticed in that registration, and again, the presentation is to highlight what our challenges are. What we noticed in our data collection is that it highlighted and verified what our conventional knowledge showed us. There's clearly a gender bias in the agriculture sector. It is a male-dominated sector. It shows us in our registration that 22% of our farmers are women and 78% male. And this is what we have captured in our registration. But our registration is a significant size of total number of farmers in this country. Our guesstimates, it's not so far from what the guesstimates in terms of total farmers are. Another concern that we highlighted is the aging population or the aging number of farmers. The data has shown us that 44%, the largest percentage of farmers that we captured, are between the age of 40 and 59. And so one of the questions that was posed to me in preparation for this presentation was what concern the ministry has and how it would address this issue, where it's between 16 and 24 years of age, we're only able to identify 4% of our farmers in the sector. How will we address and how are we to invite and encourage young people to be engaged in agriculture? Another challenge affecting the agriculture sector is natural disasters or natural events. The graph, the image will show an $8.5 million value loss because of Tropical Depression Amanda and Tropical Storm Cristobal in 2020. You guys will remember that. Tropical Cyclone Nana cost us $5.1 million losses in bananas, plantains, and corn. COVID-19, which we still consider an anomaly, has still impacted in poultry, in shrimp and livestock and dairy. And we've been able to get a $5.3 million last year, where we've seen, for example, dumping with milk, and we've seen animals buried in poultry because of minimal sales, small population when the borders were closed. The domestic consumption is small in terms of not having a tourism sector and a consumption from the tourism sector. And then we saw, as I mentioned, Hurricane Eta and Iota causing an $8.2 million loss to grains, vegetables, and livestock. It's concerning because in addition to climatic conditions and natural disasters, we still have to deal with pests and diseases. For example, in 2008, we had a $3 million loss because of Newcastle disease in the poultry sector. In 2009, we had almost 30% of productive capacity reduced in the citrus industry. This was as a result of the Hue Long Ping or the citrus greening. In 2015, we saw 100,000 plus birds, which is approximately $6 million in value, lost because of avian influenza. And then later on, we saw some losses because of rabies. Those were diseases, pests and diseases. And I return to some disasters, whether they are man-made or whether they're influenced by nature completely. And here is one where we can say nature influenced some losses. This is drought. The impact of drought to the agriculture sector has caused, for example, 4,080 farmers or $19 million losses in the sugarcane sector. And you guys will remember this because it caused a delay in processing in 2019 processing period. Another highlighted is the 1,400 farmers that were affected. We lost about $6.5 million or 87,941 animals because of drought. And then losses to pastures were about 87,000 or 88,000 acres. That drought, on the graph, you will see that we had that drought between February and April. And the graph will show you the measuring or the capturing of precipitation or low precipitation between March and April. And the losses or the effect would have been reduced crop productivity, deteriorating pasture quality, reducing water reserves, and poor livestock performances. And so these are things that we need to highlight. For example, Tropical Depression Amanda and Tropical Storm Cristobal affected a total of 318 farmers or 3.5 thousand acres of land property. And this was mostly grains, like I mentioned earlier, some fruit trees and poultry. The estimated value at the time was $8.5 million in losses, something that is concerning. And how do we address these? Well, there are different recommendations that have been made, but when it comes to nature, what we have to look at is climate smart or climate resiliency that is holistic, that considers nature, that considers production interests or projections, and also considers the capacity of our farmers and our producers to adapt. Losses from hurricanes, I continue to present here. For example, Hurricane Eta and Iota in 2020 cost the country approximately $18 million in value losses, affecting 12,000 plus 13,000 acres approximately, and affecting 787 farmers in total. That's what we captured. COVID-19 again has affected us significantly. On the screen, we'll see here how it affected dairy and poultry more significantly than the others. In speaking about livestock, one of the ways that it affected livestock was the inability of our growers or livestock producers to export beef through the informal market. And so the government is working on formalizing that market. Again, you all know that COVID-19 has affected economic growth, and it's added to the other issues that the country is facing. In 2019, it is reported that our debt to GDP was around 98%. That was highlighted in 2020 and 2021, now where we're seeing a debt to GDP of 128%. Government's blue bond, it was reported the blue bond agreement impacted this debt, and so it's down to about 118% debt to GDP, but that is still concerning as a developing country. The IMF and the World Bank keeps reminding these countries, or countries like ours, that a sustainable debt should be around 70 or 78% debt to GDP. Why am I highlighting this? The agriculture sector contributes significantly to the GDP and can influence the sort of reduction that's needed in a sustainable way, where the agriculture sector has or continues to guarantee food, subsidized income, healthy lifestyle, and is one of the best sector in terms of resiliency building to financial shocks, to trade shocks, and to climatic shocks as posed by climate change. In looking at those challenges that the sector is faced with, the government has placed on its table a road to recovery, one where different sectors are included and where it intends to lower the debt to GDP by implementing some fiscal consolidation and to expand growth-enhancing structural reforms. The agriculture sector falls directly into those. Having presented the challenges that affect the sector, this is an image that I like to place, especially for those of us who continue to advocate and advance an unsustainable agriculture activities or practices. Pesticide, especially the increased use of pesticides, continues to bring the concern of resiliency, pest resiliency, whether it's grass species or animal species, and then the contamination that continues to happen if we're not careful. And so I kind of like this slide and wanted to share this with you all. And it's the issue of whitefly in this country and the level of resiliency that whitefly has developed to some of the products, the concern of weeds that are now even more stubborn than before, you know, kinds of tell you that soon you'll see a mosquito sitting on a mosquito coil. And therefore, there'll be time for us to worry. The government matching the good. So you are all aware that in November of last year, there's a new administration taking government, and they have brought to the forefront a farm to table policy. Not so different from the food and agriculture policy, but it now includes specific targets and sets specific time frame. And that's what's interesting from this. It's looking again at a holistic vision where it's considering the current situation and then targeting strategic goals, restructure programs, and placing the finances between to support those. The policy objective looks at to replace and substitute imports, as I've mentioned. Looking at the trade deficit, it's very important that we look at these products that are being imported and see if we can compete and match in quality and consistency and continuity, so that first Belizean can consume what we produce, and later on we can also export what we produce, competing at the high level that the region and the global producers are doing so. The farm to food policy also looks at supporting affordable financing for farmers. This is another issue affecting producers and farmers. The high interest rates and the high borrowing from commercial banks. It looks at reviewing a tax system where it would contemplate fair, efficient, and development-driven tax systems. It intends to work in partnership with the traditional sectors, but also to increase productivity and competitiveness of these sectors, considering that these sectors are facing certain challenges, whether because of disease or inability to compete on the global market, to update and implement trade policy agreements, and so on and so on. But one of the more important things that I'd like to highlight from this is the support to increase local production and commodities and to lead a buy local campaign. Many people will see that the government is taking a stance on the Ministry of Agriculture in that it will control the importation, for example, of those commodities that are produced in the country. And where we're seeing that, for example, is in the production of carrots, potatoes, celery, broccoli, onion, and grains, where those are produced in the country and where we are able to satisfy our domestic consumption, then importation of these will be controlled or limited. And that's encouraging to see because it now stimulates or incentivizes producers to engage in agriculture production without having that additional risk included in the risk packages, considering that agriculture production is a high risk activity. The government also placed a 100-day development plan that speaks around the same recommendations or targets as is suggested in our food policy. And so therefore, we're looking at how the government, and especially the Ministry of Agriculture and our stakeholders, will consider some non-traditional commodities. I mentioned coconut. Hemp is growing as a commodity of interest. There was a bill drafted and submitted to the House in terms of a hemp act, but I believe it was returned for improvement and emendations because it needed a bit more work. There is interest to support diversification in livestock production and to win new markets, regional markets for livestock exportation. Poultry and cheese, milk and cheese, ice cream is now in Grenada, and we're looking to see honey return to the 1980s, where honey was exported to the US and Europe, but good quality honey, and of interest has been organic honey. And so these are commodities or non-traditional commodities that the government is, and the Ministry of Agriculture is now looking to advance on. Of course, you can develop these commodities, but if you don't look at markets and spend time studying the market and looking at trade and trade performance, then there would be some challenges there. And so what the government is looking at are partial scope agreements with Mexico, with El Salvador, with Guatemala, and more importantly, with Asia. There was this announcement that Taiwan last 2 weeks agreed and signed on to an economic partnership agreement where we are now able to trade and export and import a large number of commodities with Taiwan at reduced tariff rates or zero tariff in some instances. Again, tax reform, but more importantly, looking at importing technologies and reducing importation costs for those technologies that are climate smart, irrigation equipment, cover structure equipment, and then packaging equipment for agro-processing. There's a growing support and policies will be implemented and applied to protect agro-processors in this country. So value addition is a point of interest. Again, there are certain projects that the government has endeavored in and the Ministry of Agriculture, especially the Extension Service, those projects that looks to improve farmers' ability to produce and to sustain production and to build resiliency in terms of threats to climate change and market threats. And so we have projects like the Resilient Rural Belize that is targeting small producers and looking at supporting good agricultural practices, organic practices, eco-friendly practices, and adapting those into our production system. Food basket, ensuring that those commodities are protected, but also to monitor the prices of those. I saw that Cabinet has approved the Ministry of Agriculture to now look at consumer price, look at the consumer price index, but to protect consumption, to protect consumers from price gouging that's happening recently. And again, I've mentioned here where the agriculture sector and our partnership, trade partnership, is of high importance. In terms of extension service specifically, we have had to return, and I said earlier in the presentation, we had to adopt information management system, agriculture information management system. And so that there's a protocol established for us to do that. We just don't go out and get information from farmers or producers. And when we do get information, it's guided properly so that there's a standard and it's recognized, and then therefore this information can be used to guide decision making and later on to implement activities and projects to benefit farmers. And so we visit with the farm, we speak to the farmers, our extension officers are out monitoring production, engaging producers, and then sharing the information. They're also bringing to the producers the support that the ministry continues to offer in protecting production, in controlling and limiting importation when there is production happening, and then to share market information system. And so we have a statistical unit at the ministry as well, and then the extension service exchanges those information, and then those are returned back to the farmers by way of our extension visits or farmer group meetings, and then they're placed as well on our website. That information has allowed us to monitor the growing number of farmers in our country, to monitor the level of investment that has been made in the sector, and then to compartmentalize and organize where there's large producers, where there are clustered producers, where priority commodities have been identified, where new commodities are being identified, and then where there is increased need to reach out to a group of farmers. And so our commodities range is wide. There's no one specific priority commodity. We have between 16 and 32 commodities that we service. But what stands out would be the conventional commodities, which is banana, sugar, and citrus. Cacao continues to be an area of interest. We provide technical assistance and support to cattle production. We encourage crop rotation. We teach and show information and share information with large producers and small producers in terms of improved grass species, for example, improved breed, and then that's in the case of livestock with cattle. And then in vegetables, what has been a technology of growing interest is the cover structures or protective structures, because of our high level or high incidence of pests and diseases, and the way that has allowed producers now to reduce the application of pesticides, as well as to improve in terms of the efficiency in irrigation application, in water application. And so we looked at, we have applied services and shared technology in terms of drip irrigation and fertigation, which is the use of fertilizers in the application of water for efficient water use, as well as efficient fertilization application. That's in vegetables. And as well, we've done some support in coconut, in soursop, in lime, in pineapple. And so there are different techniques and capacity building that we've done and trainings that we've done. In terms of our continued efforts for 2022-2023, I thought that I'd highlight here that our focus will continue to be to look at revisiting our cost of production. There is no doubt inflation, 2019, 2020, 2021. There's inflation, there is price increase in fertilizer, there's price increase in fuel, and other agricultural inputs. And so our focus is to look at where we can assist farmers and producers to address this concern, this issue. We intend to improve in terms of the application of good agriculture practices, promoting good agriculture practices and organic production, and then to look at continued representation and engagement of the agriculture or private and public partners in the agriculture sector. We are doing and applying our efforts to what is within our capacity, resource capacity of the government, but we've also signed on to agreements with World Bank, IFAD, FAO, and one particular project that we're about to engage in is a $25 million project called the Climate Resilient Sustainable Agriculture Project, which is intends to look at increasing agricultural productivity and build resilience to climate change risk among targeted producers and to respond effectively to an eligible crisis or emergency. And this is a 5-year project, projected to be a 5-year project, and it will be led by the Ministry of Agriculture. That's the only one that I thought I'd place there in highlighting the focus and interest of the agriculture sector. I could have spent a bit more time in describing the technologies or the training that we've done in terms of some specific commodities and then the diversification that has been happening. But I didn't want to get too specific because I was only being provided for 30 to 45 minutes now for the presentation. So I believe that I've concluded the presentation, and I'd like to now open up for any observations, comments, and questions. Thank you. Hello?
Okay, we do some questions, some very good ones.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'll just take them kind of in the order they came in. Okay, this person noted that Belize and Guatemala do not have a high import-export ratio. Do you think there's a positive future for increasing agriculture relations with Guatemala?
I think there is, there's always been. My comment there would be this. There is no formal agreement with Guatemala for trade. Our borders, our formal borders have not and is not able to document any formal trade. We don't have a formal agreement. And that's not because of Belize's not being expressing interest. It's more because of the substantial claim that has existed. And then there's been, some people will say there hasn't been the political will to engage in formalizing a market. We've always been taught that our neighbors in Central America should be our preferable trade targets or market because of the high population that exists in Central America. That's one. Two, there is trade, there is exchange of currency between Belize and Guatemala, Belize and Honduras, and that has happened since time immemorial. It's a cultural activity in the south for producers, for farmers to exchange grains, to sell grains, rice, black beans, corn, cattle, poultry. Lately, we've seen cardamom, and we've seen, I believe it's yellow ginger. We've seen where our producers in the South have exported these across to Guatemala and sold these across to Guatemala. Of course, the currency there is quetzal. And so they have their own agreement and their own way of controlling that currency once it's in Belize. But yes, there's always been an informal trade. And you'll know even better than I do that, for example, I believe the last figure I saw was a $30 million benefit, or $30 million cattle, $30 million revenue earned by cattle producers since the borders were open in 2020. That's I believe that the borders were open in November. Was opened, well, let me not say the border was open, but ever since cattle exportation was allowed to continue, informal cattle exportation was allowed to continue, there's been a $30 million contribution to the agriculture sector. At least that's what's been reported by Belize livestock producers. No? I hope that I responded to that question.
Yes. Can you address the produce testing for agrochemicals on produce with Baja?
So, I believe that Baja would only look at importation. I'm not able to respond to that question with the level of information that would be required. I don't know that Baja is conducting that. I would have to reach out to my colleagues at Baja to see where that is. I know that there was the intention from PCB and Baja to collaborate in an effort to start to look at monitoring both importation and exportation, monitoring chemical residues in products that in these commodities. I cannot respond to that at the moment. I don't have enough information on that.
Okay. Are the extension agents trained about organic farming practices? And do you know if organic agriculture is part of the curriculum at the University of Belize?
Extension officers are trained in a variety of practices. Specific or solely organic practices, there's not much training. What we do significant training in is in good agriculture practices and climate smart practices. And when we look at the climate smart practices, most of the technologies that we adopt or recommend for adoption, most of the technologies that we apply and support are technologies that assist in the reduction or later on elimination of harmful pesticides. So we support and we are more informed and experienced in good agriculture practices or integrated agriculture practices. There are little training in complete organic practices, and so that is more assigned to our research unit. And so at our research unit in Central Farm, there is, for example, trials and testing in the use of vermiculture, in the use of composting and efficient composting and efficient application of products that are not synthetic. And so we would benefit from those sort of training and experiences. Again, our emphasis is mainly in good agricultural practices and integrated agricultural practices. And that's the reason why we've increased our studying and research in the use of cover structures, in the use of fertigation system, in the application of varieties, breeds, resistance to drought, resilient or sustainable, or tolerant, resistance or tolerant to drought, tolerant to increased pest and disease incidents. And so that those are some of the training and capacity building that we're focused on.
Okay. Don't you think there's a risk to attracting foreign investment? Most investments come with strings attached, and Belize is in danger of losing its lands and ultimately its sovereignty. How does the Ministry of Agriculture address this risk, and are they involved in negotiations with potential investors?
Yeah, so that's a good question, a very good question. For investment, risks are higher. Of what we've noticed is higher in tourism and in land and those sort of that sector. In the agriculture sector, agriculture production is dominated by two groups in this country: small producers and large producers. And our large producers are Belizeans, and they dominate 75% of production in this country. The Mennonites are Belizeans. And then the small producers, which are 80% are responsible for the diversified products in this country, comes from the small producers. And that is for household consumption, auto consumption, and subsidized income, as well as vegetable varieties on the market. So it's not too much of, it's not the highest risk. Agriculture on a whole is a risk, it's a high risk activity. Foreign investment is not the highest, it's not among the risk. The high risk that we, as I've mentioned, is climate risk and finance risk. Those are the highest risk. And then third would be in pest and disease, which is still in some instances associated with climate change. Sometimes I say that there's a difference there, and I look at increased pest and disease more because of unsustainable practices in the agriculture sector. It's more human influence rather than climate influence. But yes, the threats of climate change is indicating that we'll see more some of those pests. But foreign investments is not the highest. I would agree that overall for the country of Belize, you need to treat that concern with more priority. But I always feel that has to come more from, for example, the Ministry of Lands. That's where I'm seeing more concerns or more losses incurred by Belizeans and the government of this country. In terms of the agriculture sector, we're not seeing foreign. So let me say it's growing. The interest is growing. For hemp, for example, we've seen some interest. For cattle, we've noticed the increased growth in coconut, and that is not our typical Belizeans investing there. And so I like the question because it highlights what are some of our future concerns, what our future concerns should be. And so I agree that it's something that we do need to consider. However, typically for the agriculture sector, it hasn't been the highest concern or the highest risk.
Okay, next question is the ministry doing anything to encourage or train farmers in regenerative agriculture and to market the produce that's farmed in this way?
There's been a lot of mention of approaching some of these adapting some of these practices, and I wouldn't say that we've placed it as a topic or the key topic, but I've seen where it's been included in a combination of practices, good practices that we can look at, or good production types that we can look at. It's something that needs to be included in terms of not the policy. The policy speaks to these things, but in terms of application and actual practices, there are some challenges there. What I find is that it's only when we get lobbying groups, farmers association, or business group approaching and requesting support, that's when we've responded. But to say clearly that it's been priority, it has not been priority. It's been more of an inclusive type of conversation and a cocktail of activities that we support. And we support several of these. Mentioned that we do support organic production. We support eco-friendly production systems. We support low carbon footprint or within the ecological zones or ecological areas, or protect in buffering protected areas. So we look at those sort of things.
Okay. Has the Ministry of Agriculture encouraged the government of Belize? Oops. Let me see. Lost my chat here for a second. Okay. Let me find it. Okay, has the ministry encouraged the government of Belize to give tax credits to farmers for increasing local production or meeting other goals?
Does the ministry
has the Ministry of Agriculture encouraged the government to give tax credits to farmers for increasing local production or meeting other goals?
So what we do know is that what I've seen is that there's been zero tax, like I mentioned, zero tax on what will be applied. It's been approved by the House, and what will be applied is zero tax on irrigation pieces and agro processing, agro packaging materials. So I've seen where that exists. Is in existence. I know that we're looking at improving or looking at some subsidies. I believe that in the sugarcane sector, there is some subsidy there for fuel. It's not called a subsidy, but there's some support there for fuel, and there's some support to citrus and banana. It's a discussion that needs to continue in terms of how else we can support producers, small producers especially. And I think it's a discussion that will come up when we speak about when we start to see increased exportation of the diversified products. So I think that's where that will come from.
Okay, are there any efforts to acquire expertise for growing hemp in the tropics?
There is, and it's been more private sector driven. The private sector are the ones advancing hemp production. The assistance and expertise that the government has requested has been those that are given to, for example, Baja, which will be one of the entities to ensure that that the practices, and as well, remember we're talking about hemp, not marijuana, but that the THC level is indeed which pertains to hemp, and so Baha will monitor those. There's a policy document that's being prepared to guide, like I mentioned, there's an act being prepared at the moment to guide hemp production in this country. And so in the preparation of that act, the government has highlighted challenges and concern. And so the initial request expertise has been in preparation of this, the regulations or the act that will guide hemp production. And then later on, the individual institutions, which will play major roles, the police department, national security, extension service, BAHA, PCB, will receive technical assistance as we develop. So yes, the government is endeavoring to do so.
Is the plasma propagation lab at the University of Belize Central Farm active? If not, when do you think it will become operative again?
And that answer that question, that would be a question that you have to pose with the Ministry of Education. So I do know it's important. We know that for example, the pineapple, there was an intention for pineapple and banana clones to be produced at the biotechnology lab there. The initial development was a project sponsorship. And so, there needs to be a conversation between the two ministries, and then later on with the government, if indeed that will continue to play an important role in the agriculture sector.
Are there concerns that foreign companies are utilizing thousands of acres to grow, for example, sugar for foreign markets, while many Belizean farmers complain they cannot access land to farm?
I don't know if that's a concern. It hasn't reached the ministry. We know from the communities that we work with, Valley of Peace, Bomba, San Carlos, we know that there's a land issue in this country overall. Access to land is an issue overall. We know that these resources aren't infinite. And so these will continue to grow as concerns, not only land, but water, access and resource. We are all aware of the threat posed on the Belize River, the Maka and the Mopan, because of the extraction of water that continues to happen. And so, yes, resources and access to resources will become a problem. Government selling land, land that belongs to, I believe they're called, I think they're still using colonial land. If I believe government has a price for those, and if Belizeans don't have the finance to procure land that is available, then I don't know that the government has a policy to restrict foreigners from purchasing these land. I know that whatever development plan any foreigner has for a land, it has to be presented to the Ministry of Lands and for EI and for ENAC. We can't stop this year. I don't see Ministry of Agriculture is involved in agriculture development with people who either lease land, own the land, or rent, lease and rent, or own. Squatting was more of a concern maybe 15 years ago. That is reducing now. It's going down. We don't have that much complaints or as much. I believe that resources and access to resources will be an issue that collectively we have to approach and address. I'm not certain if the Ministry of Agriculture can do that on its own.
Okay. What is the current position on GMO corn and soy?
There is still a ban on GMO I know that there is a biosafety committee that is led by Baha, and they're looking at a policy for a seed policy that will address these concerns of genetically modified organisms.
Export requires HACCP certification, which can be expensive. Is there anything being done to help farmers wishing to export with these expenses?
I know Baha provides some support with HACCP. I think it's not only that they do this, but they also build relationship and help potential exporters to reach out for technical assistance. And there's some support given there. The Ministry of Agriculture will work through Baha. Remember, Baha is and PCB remains priority entities in charge of HACCP. And so the support would have come from, for example, we've gotten some support from Oyirsa and ICA, but in terms of procuring the equipment, that is a questionable one. What we have done is brought in experts to guide and give support. And we've also built good relationship with existing exporters like Marie Sharp, who on her own had to invest in her own HACCP certified facility. And it's costly indeed. But what she's done is that she's reached out to Mexico, for example, where the cost is a bit less. No? In terms of what the government has done, again, it's only bringing in the experts to give some guidance. They've provided the equipment or so. But yes, there are some guidance provided to Baha.
Okay. ProOrganic developed criteria to certify pesticide-free farm practices based on iPhone guidelines. Would you, with the ministry, be interested in meeting with us to see if the Ministry of Agriculture could implement such a certification program to add these farmers to BAIMS?
There's no restriction in terms of registered. If you're a farmer and you're producing, you can be registered. So the Belize information system is designed to register everybody who's producing. There's no restriction there. In terms of whether the ministry would be interested in looking at support from other stakeholders, the ministry has this open door policy. The chief agriculture officer is always interested in looking at where we have additional support, but more where we can help in modifying and modernizing our impact. And that usually comes from the private sector. You'll find that in most instances, the private sector has been the ones with the novice technology and has highlighted and shown to the government where direction to probably look at and adapt. Remember, the government is more for support and policies, and to a limited extent, reaching out in terms of providing technology. It's normally that the private sector is the driver and the innovator. And so, yes, sure, if there's this group or this collective that wants to advance, I believe that you prepare your presentation and I'm sure the government will receive, or the representatives will receive, and we look at having the discussion and see how we can build a support and a network to advance whatever interest there is.
Okay. And this is from Beth Roberson. She says, thank you for the interesting updates on ag. The policy objectives of the farm to table are good. Can you tell us if the zero VAT foods list has been reviewed or updated? The last list she saw included a zero VAT ramen noodles, and pack macaroni and cheese. These should have been removed years ago, as they are exactly the types of processed foods that we should be avoiding for health reasons.
Yeah.
And more so now, as we need to reduce importation of processed foods. Please pass the word along to reduce stopping privileges, no VAT, and add taxes to unhealthy processed imports, which we don't need. We can do better, and people would do better if these toxic imported foods were not available so cheaply here. So kind of a message to you, and the
Yeah,
question, I guess, would be
yeah,
about the VAT list.
yeah, I agree to the comment. There are some concerns in terms of looking at the food basket and what should be the contents of the food basket, the basic food basket, which is in some way as what we look at in terms of adding or removing or having zero consumer tax on it. I agree. I believe that cassava, cocoa, potatoes, and having some sort of enhancers, bioenhancers in these can serve the purpose and at an affordable cost. I think why ramen and corned beef, chicken sausage is so highly consumed in this country is because of the price. And I know that you're right in terms of nutritive value. It's zero, sometimes 0 to none. No? But I agree with the comment.
How do we stand on pesticide importations? So we need to follow Mexico to ban out, phase out glyphosate.
I'd have to look at what PCB has updated. I know that, and I wouldn't want to speak ahead, but to some extent, I almost thought that it was some of these things were banned. I think that it's on the table. We are at a bit, well, you are at a better position than you were 5-10 years ago in your requests or your lobbying to have it banned. PCB is the institution that we would have to reach out to and see what the delay would be about, or what adjustments would need to be made if indeed that's the route we want to take.
And do you know if how the recent Taiwan trade agreement has affected the sheep breeding facility at Central Farm?
Trade agreement. Okay, so I'm not seeing the link. Why would the trade agreement affect the breeding program?
I don't know that. Madeline, you want to answer that?
Can you hear me, Jenny?
Yes.
It's more, it's just, it's such a wonderful resource there to get sheep poop fertilizer at Central Farm. I'm surprised more people don't get into it. And I know that they had, the Taiwanese had, we signed up for support for the sheep area, and I just wondered if you knew if that affected the poop pickup.
No, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think there is need for concern there. The Taiwanese assistance to the sheep genetic improvement program that's happening in Central Farm will continue because of the we signed on to bilateral agreement for technical support and assistance, and that comes through that, which is separate from our partial scope agreement, which is specifically looking at trade of commodities between the two countries. So it's separate. We have a 5-year renewal of the.
It's such a wonderful resource. They have
agree.
that sheep poop there. It's so much easier to deal with than cow poop.
I
That-
agree.
Yeah, it's great. You know, I mean, it's in a way, it's almost like you have to have like a promotion of that thing so everyone knows it's there.
I agree. It's one of the byproducts that we have not taken
Promoted.
advantage of. We should, yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
There's one more question about glyphosate. Is that we know about the pollution, the soil pollution and degradation, that it's such a problem worldwide. And it's also considered a carcinogen. Is there anything being done to encourage safer alternatives for the farmers here?
I'm sorry, you broke up, so I didn't.
Oops. Okay, talking about glyphosate again, is there anything being done to encourage safer alternatives for the farmers here?
Yeah, so there is not that big to chemicals, but more to the other practices that could help influence, for example, reduce grass and broadleaf infestation. No, for example, we promote of mulch, plastic mulch in hot pepper production, and that has helped to reduce the control of grass species and broad. I know your concern would be more for the grain which have large production and have a higher application of glyphosate amount. For large producers, there's not much that is happening there. I believe that they are advocating for us to approve approve the importation of GMOs because of what they claim allows us to reduce chemical application there. Pest or grass, no? There is more work to be done there. There has to be more work. At the level of small producers and medium-sized producers, we are looking at cover structures, which helps to control weeds. We're looking at plastic mulch. We're looking at green mulch. In sugarcane, I know that they're working towards promoting leguminous species or leguminous plants that help not only fix nitrogen but control weeds. So there are some practices that I've seen.
Okay, oops, let me see. Okay, I see that Ippolita raised your hand. If you have a question, you can type it in to the host, or just go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, good afternoon. I'll go ahead and ask my question.
Okay.
I want to know if is there a way that does agriculture or from Central Farm, do they assist with seedlings? I'm not a farmer, but I just want, call it maybe. I am a teacher by profession, but I did plant some couple vegetables already, but I did it in my backyard. So I'm just concerned is there a way that they assist with seedlings? That's my question. Thank you.
So good question as well. We've done some of those in the past. It's been more where we've received assistance through some project. It's not a continuous practice. Have started to look at selling seedlings at a reduced price. So that has helped. We find that when we sell seedlings, there's more rush to purchase our seedlings rather than when we give it out we don't see an impact as such the way we should. So I know that in some occasions we do undertake those sort of support to give out seedlings, but it's not a practice that we want to encourage. Also, project is designed to do.
Thank you. But with are they available at any time, or where do I go get it? Say if I want to purchase some seedlings.
Yes, it's at Central Farm. It's a Central Farm, and there are some there's some time periods where these are available. At this time, I believe they are, and so you should be able to find more what we call the cool climate, the broccoli and the cauliflower. You should be able to find celery in terms of seedlings and some sweet pepper. So Central Farm should have at this time. That's the only facility that provides that service.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions? I see a couple of comments here, more specific, I think, to asking the group questions. Well, one question is, do you know of any soil testing here in Belize, or do we have to collect the soil and send it to the US or someplace?
I believe that most local agents are exporting. Know that CG at one time did general soil testing. I'm not certain if they still do that. The Ministry of Agriculture does not do that. We would forward any request to local agents. So I believe most of these local agents are shipping out the samples.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? I'm getting comments that people have really enjoyed it and a great presentation. It was very informative.
Happy that you enjoyed it. I know that we can do a sort of presentation that looks specifically at practices on a farm, but it would be best if we have specific commodities identified, because what we apply in coconut is not the same what we would apply in pineapple or in grains, and then as well the scale would also give differences. And so I was a bit cautious in terms of giving a too technical presentation, because we do that mostly for specific commodities of interest, particular commodities of interest.
Well, Beth did have a question. She says, why is the celery for sale in the winter, local celery, so floppy and not firm? I like to buy local, but miss the firm, crisp, imported celery.
Oh, that's a good one. And it's the same. Some people have the same comments with our carrot, local carrot production. It's a work in progress. We have had instances where our local production of broccoli, cauliflower, celery was similar to the imported quality, very similar, very good quality. These are all dependent on our climate, one, and two, on market availability. In many instances, the first good quality product goes directly to the restaurants and resorts, and then the second grade would go to our markets, and then after 1 or 2 days, they're already wilting or reduced in quality. The reason why it's only planted at this time of the year is because we need the short days. We need November to January. These are short days, long nights, and the climate is cooler. The weather is cooler, and then we don't normally have intense rainfall between the end of November and January, February, and so that is that is particularly important for reproduction, for lettuce production, for potato production. We need the cool nights, the long cool nights, and that is what's helps improve quality and maintains quality, and farmers will see that celery, especially, you get better growth when it's shaded. You get longer stems, crispier stems when it's shaded and properly irrigated. And so this has been a particularly dry year. And so some of the celery planting has happened late, but we should be seeing better quality lettuce. Better quality within the next 3 weeks. Communities like Roseville, Upper Barton Creek, Lower Barton Creek, Springfield, Green Hills, these communities provide the larger bulk of celery in late December and January. Early December and the ending of November, the celery will come more out of the Valley of Peace area and the area. And in this area, it's a bit lower. The terrain is lower, the altitude is lower. These farmers would not practice as much shading of the Mennonites in Springfield, or the typical Mennonites. They would produce, they reside in higher elevation, which is helpful because it allows for cooler temperatures and cooler nights. And then they would be specific in planting only when start to see the favorable weather conditions, because they wouldn't apply much irrigation. I've seen them adapting now in terms of improving and applying more irrigation. And so we're noticing that we should see better quality spring crops going forward. We do want to support local production. We know that consumers prefer the imported commodities, but it continues to cause a dent in our national and local production. When we are at a time of COVID and we are at a time exposed or vulnerable to import amounts and volumes, then we have to be cautious and improve in terms of our food sovereignty, or percentage of food security. And I think it's important that we support local production and guarantee available production, especially when faced with the threats of reduced emission caused by challenges to transportation and transport workers being affected by COVID-19, and as well as countries or governments hoarding their produces. So I always say that one of the commodity we need to pay specific attention to is flour. Belizeans high consumers of flour-based products, and we have not found a way to subsidize or substitute. We depend on a large level, we depend on flour for the morning, for the evening meal. And that's concerning when we import every single pound of flour that comes into this country. And that's something we need to pay attention to.
Dottie had a question of, are extension officers assigned to districts only, or are some assigned to specific crops?
Both. Each district have an agriculture office and has a group of extension officers. We have priorities, and so some officers are assigned to 3 or 4 crops. We know we have one officer assigned to livestock. So one officer will do everything that's livestock and not deal with crops, while the other officers will deal with our crops. And then there are some officers that have become specialists or experts in some particular crops like onion, potato, tomato, and sweet pepper. We have officers that are, very versed in these commodities. And now what the ministry has done is that it's restructured our outreach. And so we're now developing experts in some commodities. For example, we have coordinators now for non-traditional and fruit trees. And so we have, you guys know Miss Faye Garnett, who is responsible solely for non-traditional and fruit trees. And that helps because then her team will build the capacity and expertise and specialization for only two commodities. We also have a coordinator, for example, for cover structure and school gardens or backyard gardens. And so when those of you who are interested, for example, in seedling or getting support in constructing your cover structure or your backyard garden, we can direct you specifically to a extension officer or to a particular unit. We do so as well with the livestock coordinator now, which has now allowed for a officer to be assigned specifically to sheep production. And so that's going to help. So I hope I answered it there. And then we have the cooperative department, and they've spent a considerable amount of time and investment in honey production. And so we have 2 cooperative officers that we consider experts when we want to look at building capacity or doing training in honey production.
Beth sent a message that there was a project about 7 years ago to promote cassava products and cassava flour, and that Cardi and MAF were involved, and a couple of folks from Mbapa, and in Brazil came here. In Brazil, their government subsidizes using, I think, it was 30% cassava flour in all bread products in their public school foods.
Mm-hmm. That is true. That is a very true.
Yeah, perhaps publicity and education on how to use cassava flour would help.
That's a very true statement. We have gotten support from Mexico, from INIFAP, from Brazil, from Embrapa, from Colombia. And we have, as you all know, we have an agro-processing unit that ever since its onset has had the support of the government of China, Taiwan, the Republic of China, Taiwan. And we do produce cassava flour. We're now producing sweet potato flour. We produce yam. I've seen a yam flour there. What we have not done is promote, and I believe it's because we're still trying to perfect the production of these types. 30% is good, right? We tried a sweet potato muffin and sweet potato tortilla that was 100% sweet potato flour. And it wasn't, in some instances it's an acquired taste, but consistency was good. Presentation was good. I think it requires a bit more perfection. We did do trial programs in school feeding, attaching it to school feeding, where we would have cassava flour, 30%, and sweet potato and cocoa flour in base products, and providing it for school feeding programs, and it worked out well. We knew more promotion. We need to do more advocacy in getting consumers to start looking at this, procuring it, and then adapting it into our national palette. So I agree with the statement, and there's more work to be done there. We have a facility that's doing some of the initial work and has been doing it for some while, but we need to expand and do more outreach. Yes, that's true. They are not yet for sale. It's more for training, because the intention at this point is to train groups, agro-productive groups, processing groups, value addition, to train. So we're training, not for sale. But I believe that if agreements can be made with particular groups, I'm sure the ministry would be receptive to engaging in a sort of partnership that would see the production of and sale to specific groups, to support these groups. Again, ministry is not to compete in the private sector, but rather to capacity building and training and to assist. Our work should always be for policy development.
I don't see any other questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
All right, I want to thank the speaker for presenting tonight. Just a quick question. If I wanted to put my land into production, will the extension office come out and, kind of advise as to what plants or animals would be good for my land? Thank you.
That's a good question, and it's one where we've seen increased requests officers to visit because of the impact of COVID-19. We've seen a return to the land from many of those workers or previous workers engaged in the tourism sector. And so we've seen an increased demand for extensions officers to visit new areas and new potential farmers and give support. So it's there. Our offices are open for those. The only concern that I'm saying is that the demand is high and there's only, a limited amount of officers. So you would have to have a bit of patience and then continue to give us a call to request that indeed we remember or, we try to reach out. But yes, we do so. The way we've improved outreach is we've done more large group farmers meeting, and so you'll know or you'll hear that cooperative groups or organizations or cluster groups receive more of our visits or attention because it's easier that way. We do training of trainers, we do farmer field schools, and then we try to reach out to individual farmers or new farmers in terms of giving advice. So yes, we do so. I just ask that I implore that you have a bit of patience with us because we're a small group.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that will conclude our speaker meeting for today. And again, very, very informative, Clifford. We appreciate all of the information that you've given to us and your time that you've shared. Just in conclusion, our next pro-organic meeting, instead of our monthly business meeting, we're having a Christmas gathering at Lower Dover on December the 18th. If you'd like to join Pro-Organic, you can send an email to proorganicbelize@gmail.com or information about how to get the pesticide-free produce. Send an email to that email address. You can go to our Facebook page, Pro-Organic Belize, or Pro-Organic Belize Facebook group for information or discussion. Our next speakers meeting will be January the 8th, the second Saturday, since January 1st is on a Saturday. The speaker will be from Humana People to People Belize, and they engage all kinds of things, working with the local communities there, and they are in the south of Belize. So we look forward to that being a very informative presentation. So thank you again, and we will close this off.
All right, thank you again and have a good evening.
And you too. Thank you, everyone.